Welcome to WhiskyCast, cask strength conversation featuring news and interviews from the world of whiskey. I'm Mark Gillespie. This is episode number 1065 for July 14th, 2024. Coming up in a few minutes.
What is our job here? Do we reopen this fabulous distillery, which would have had a style of whiskey, a style of single malt, and we try to slavishly reproduce that style? Or do we Are we obliged to try to reproduce it like a sort of a historical act? Or do we say, we've got this fabulous distillery, let's start again and make the best whiskey, single malt whiskey that we can make?
Edward Odim is the managing director of Aceo Limited, which has won the tender to bring the historic Dallas Dhu distillery in Speyside back into production. It's been almost a decade since Odim first broached the subject with officials at Historic Environments Scotland, which has been operating Dallas Dhu as a museum for many years. I'll talk with Edward Odim later on WhiskyCast in depth. Our conversation covered everything from balancing the need to preserve Dallas Dhu as a historical site while running a modern-day distillery, to the links between Dallas Dhu and Aceo's Murray McDavid independent bottlings. That's just ahead, along with the What I'm Tasting This Week department, Behind the Label, and much more. The news is next on this week's WhiskyCast.
And now, a message from Robin Redbreast.
Small batch. How would you describe it? It's like an Irishman's understanding of baseball. Extremely limited.
Proud sponsor of WhiskyCast. Redbreast. Pass it on.
Gabriel Cardarella from Jewers here. The 2024 U.S. Open Championship may have ended, but you can still get your hands on the whiskey created to honor it. The new Jewers 19-Year-Old Champions Edition. Trust me, a whiskey you don't want to miss. More details coming up.
Let's get started with the news. It's brought to you by the Dalmore. Politics is entering the whiskey world this week. Black Bourbon Society founder Samara Davis has launched a boycott of Blue Run Spirits, which is owned by Molson Coors. That's because Coors family members have helped finance the Heritage Foundation's Project 2025 initiative. It's a roadmap for the next Republican administration to follow, and Davis called it, quote, a direct assault on civil rights, environmental protections, and democracy itself. The Society has canceled its current barrel pick with Blue Run Spirits, which had also been a sponsor of the Society until now. The brands involved in the boycott include Blue Run Spirits, Five Trail, and Barman Bourbon. We've reached out to Coors Whiskey Company executives for a comment, but have not received a response as of publication time. Pernod Ricard is consolidating its U.S. whiskey distilleries and brands under a new umbrella company. North American distillers will function in the same way that Chivas Brothers and Irish distillers do within Pernod Ricard, with responsibility for production and marketing of Jefferson's Bourbon, Rabbit Hole, Smooth Ambler, TX Whiskey, and Screwball. Until now, all five brands had operated separately within Pernod Ricard USA. Veteran Pernod Ricard executive Richard Black will head up North American distillers, while Bourbon Hall of Famer Kaveh Zamanian will leave his post at Rabbit Hole to oversee liquid strategy for the entire group. Meanwhile, construction delays have pushed back the opening date for North American Distillers' new Jefferson's Bourbon Distillery in Kentucky. The project lost 3.5 months because of rain and a switch in general contractors. That means it won't open in November as originally planned. The opening is now set for next June. Ground has been broken on yet another distillery in Kentucky. The Eastern Light Distilling Company is being built in Rowan County in eastern Kentucky and is being led by former Peerless Master Distiller Caleb Kilburn and Cordell Lawrence. The $143 million facility is expected to open in early 2026. A Texas federal court judge has ruled that federal laws banning home distilling are unconstitutional. The ruling came in a lawsuit filed by the Hobby Distillers Association. Judge Mark Pittman said the ban goes beyond Congress's powers under the Constitution. The Home Distillers Group argued that the power to control home distilling rests with the states, and Judge Pittman rejected the federal government's arguments that banning home distilling was necessary to protect tax revenue. Bittman issued a 2-week stay of his ruling to give the Justice Department time for an appeal. New whiskeys of note this week. Old Forester is releasing a new edition in its 117 series of experimental whiskeys. This one is a rum cask finished bourbon that's available at the Distillery in Louisville and a select number of states online at $120 a bottle. Wheelhorse Whiskey is also out with a rum finish. This one, a 4-year-old rye whiskey finished in Appleton Estate rum barrels. It has a suggested retail price of $37.99 a bottle. Glen Grant is out with a new 25-year-old single malt. It's matured in a combination of ex-bourbon barrels and Oloroso sherry casks and is bottled at 46% ABV. It carries a recommended retail price of around £750 a bottle. Glenmorangie is revamping its classic original single malt, which has been a 10-year-old whiskey for years. It'll now be a 12-year-old single malt, and Dr. Bill Lumsden says the project was to improve on the current 10-year-old. Pricing will remain the same, around £40 a bottle. It'll be in the U.S. later this year. U.S. pricing has not been announced. Glengoyne has unveiled a new White Oak single malt. It's matured in a combination of first fill bourbon and virgin oak casks. There's also a limited edition 24-year-old White Oak being released. It comes from American Oak first fill ex-bourbon casks. There's no word on pricing. The Glasgow Distillery Company has released 2 new small batch series bottlings. The Tokai Cask Finish Batch 2 was matured for 3 years and 4 months in first fill ex-bourbon barrels before being transferred to Hungarian Tokai sweet wine casks for an additional 3 years and 6 months. The Cognac Cask Finish Batch 2 is similar, 3 years in ex-bourbon and 3 years and 4 months in French cognac casks. However, 2 of the 5 barrels that went into this whiskey were filled with peated single malt spirit. Both sell for £59 a bottle at the distillery's website. And finally, back in episode 990 from February of last year, Dead Rabbit co-founder Jack McGarry told us about his plans to open a pub in Austin, Texas. The Dead Rabbit Austin is now open on Austin's high-profile 6th Street and will be followed later this month by the opening of the Belfast Export Neighborhood Cafe next door. Plans are in the works to open Dead Rabbit pubs in Washington, D.C. and Boston next year. You can keep up on the latest whiskey news all week long at WhiskyCast.com and in the WhiskyCast community app. The news is brought to you by the Dalmore.
Hello, Richard Patterson here, Master Distiller, Master Blender for the Dalmore. You know, whenever the team and I are in the world sharing our exceptional single malt, we like to keep in touch with Mark Gillespie and the latest news from WhiskyCast.
Let's open up the calendar and see what's happening around the world of whiskey. The Whiskey Exchange has a Glenallachie masterclass this Wednesday night at its Covent Garden store in London. Julio's Liquors in Westboro, Massachusetts has a Lafroig tasting that same night. Belfast Whiskey Week gets underway on Friday night and runs through the 27th with events all around Belfast, Northern Ireland. The Whiskey Show Canberra is Saturday in Australia's capital city, along with Sagamore Spirit Distillery's monthly Whiskey on the Waterfront party in Baltimore, Maryland. Tales of the Cocktail gets underway on Sunday the 21st and runs through the 26th in New Orleans. And a few tickets are still available for the Whiskey Exchange's Whiskey Sponge Masterclass with Angus McRailed of Decadent Drinks. It's coming up on August 1st at its Great Portland Street shop in London. If you're organizing a whiskey event, let us know about it. We'll add it to the calendars at WhiskyCast.com and in the WhiskyCast community app.
Every year, Dewar's, the official Scotch whiskey of the U.S. Open Championship, rolls out a special limited edition whiskey to celebrate that year's tournament. The 2024 championship wrapped up in June, but the 2024 Dewar's 19-year Pinehurst edition is available now, and you don't want to miss it. This year's 19-year whiskey is double-aged, then extra-matured in rye casks, offering a rich profile with notes of pear and heather honey. There's a hint of spice in there, too, along with a dusting of cinnamon and cocoa powder. It's a sensory delight for any true whiskey or golf fan. So trust me, my fellow aficionados, grab a bottle and enjoy a whiskey crafted with the same skill and precision that makes the U.S. Open legendary. Please drink responsibly. Copyright 2024. Dewar's Blended Scotch Whiskey, 46% alcohol by volume. Imported by John Dewar & Sons, Coral Gables, Florida.
WhiskyCast In Depth is brought to you by Lagavulin and the Classic Malts lineup. Dallas Dhu Distillery closed 41 years ago, only to find new life as a distilling museum run by Historic Environments Scotland. There's been talk of reviving the distillery over the last decade, and now an agreement is in place to do just that. Aceo Limited, best known for its Murray McDavid independent bottlings, has signed a deal with Historic Environments Scotland to resume production at Dallas Dhu while still maintaining it as a historic site. Edward Odim is Aceo's managing director, and we chatted the other day on a Zoom call. So this did take a long time to get done, but obviously you're excited about getting it done.
Hugely. I mean, it's taken us, it's been a real long journey. I first proposed the idea of bringing back this fabulous distillery way back in 2015. It seems like an eon ago now, but the idea was there. There was this beautiful site sitting there, underused, just a few mannequins. It was a kind of dusty old museum setting, not a sight or smell or anything relating to whiskey being made. So I approached them initially to get the site with the idea of just putting whiskey into the site, bringing some barrels, at least the maturation warehouses would be put to good use. And almost like a throwaway clause or a throwaway comment, I said, oh, and by the way, should you ever want to bring back whiskey production here, look no further, we'd be delighted, kind of thing. And that idea took seed. It started germinating, and it took a few years to sort of, pick up some real interest. But eventually, it became more and more serious, and then it become a very serious goal and ambition. And to say that Sharon and I and other colleagues of mine have been working on this so hard, we've put hundreds of hours trying to work out exactly what we need to do. There's obviously a lot of challenges in bringing back all this old, fabulous, historic equipment back into production. Some of it will have simply just become too old. I can tell you that there is a coal burning boiler which is the size of a small house, which is clearly no longer going to be used and wouldn't be allowed to be used in the modern setting. And of course, you can generate the same amount of heat in a box which is many times smaller than that because of modern technology. So there's things like that, and there's some philosophical challenges to it as well, because what is our job here? Do we reopen this fabulous distillery, which would have had a style of whiskey, a style of single malt, and we try to slavishly reproduce that style, or are we obliged to try to reproduce it like a sort of a historical act, or do we say we've got this fabulous distillery, let's start again and make the best whiskey, single malt whiskey that we can make? And I'm enjoying that debate, and it kind of divides between those who feel that we should slavishly kind of, because we've got some fabulous old bottles of Dallas Dhu spirit in our own collection, and there are a number of casks of Dallas Dhu spirit still in existence. They are still being owned, and we hope to have a few of them ourselves very soon. So we've actually got the core, the base of what the spirit was like. Should we try to just make that spirit again as much like that original spirit as possible, or can we be a little bit more imaginative? Styles of barley makes, barley species, they've changed. Many years ago, Golden Promise was very popular, and that was the sort of the whiskey makers go to barley grain, whereas today, of course, things have evolved, and there are different barley strains which are being used and would be much more favorable to be used. So there is a lovely sort of philosophical issue going on there that which will be all part of the journey of trying to deal with the challenge of reopening a fabulous old distillery.
What makes Aceo the most qualified company to do this?
I believe we've got a tremendous advantage, and I think that's probably why we won the gig, as it were, because it was a competition. There were lots of other companies who were very keen to get this opportunity. But Aceo's experience in the industry has the company was established in 1999. So we're looking at our, 30th anniversary this year?
25th.
So we've been 25th. Sorry, I can't count. Math has not been my strong point. No, but so we've been around a long time. We've been managing and artfully maturing whiskey for a long time. We have various Victorian dunnage warehouses where the spirit is, our spirit is matured. And of course, Murray McDavid has been our prime brand. Murray McDavid has literally, it's been around before us. I mean, we didn't invent the brand. The brand came into existence 30 years ago by the renowned Mark Rainier, who, it was his brand, and we acquired it from them. But Murray McDavid has been producing fabulously matured whiskies for many years, and we've been in the vanguard of whiskey maturation in more interesting styles. When I first joined the industry, and obviously before me, obviously blends are still predominantly, blended Scotch whiskey is still the thing that's mainly sold around the world. But with the revolution that there's been in single malt whiskey, that's the big thing that's changed. So single malt whiskey is a bit of a latecomer to the party, but it's the thing, the sexy thing, the thing about which we all talk. It gets all the attention. So we've been doing this 30 years ago. You would not have expected to have the variety of different wood types that there are being used today. So it was, broadly speaking, it was an ex-bourbon cask, or it was an European oak ex-sherry cask. Of course, since then, and Murray McDavid was the first to start this thing. But going back to your question, so I think Aceo's track record in maturing single malts in a variety of different styles, pushing the boundaries of the art of maturation, really put us in a really good place. Obviously, we've got a big team. We're quite a substantial company now with around 70 or so employees. And of course, within there, we've got lots of different experiences. People who have been directly involved in the manufacture or the distillation process. Obviously, a lot of people on the whiskey maturation side of things. So we've got a broad range of experiences. I think all of which kind of culminate in making us a perfect candidate to take forward the Dallas Dhu Distillery project.
How do you balance as you alluded to, the philosophical differences between managing this as a museum and making a working distillery out of it? How do you balance the two?
I think it's going to be a really interesting debate, and I think it will flip. There'll be moments when we feel that we're going to be a little bit more museum than whiskey, and then. But the whiskey is fundamentally at the heart of it. Bringing back production is the first and foremost. That's the driver. Without that, the whole revival project isn't really a runner. We need to make the whiskey, which will eventually express itself in some years to come as a single malt. Hopefully, an extremely good quality single malt, which lots of people will want to sample. So that's the kind of main driver. But we don't want to lose sight of I don't want to call it a public service, but that museum side, the museum, what is meant by museum to me, it's like opening up a place to share a history, and it's a kind of got an educational interpretation to that word. And I kind of feel that we must, given the journey of this particular distillery, it would be sad just to literally turn it into a private concern, close the door, public away, and we go off and do our thing in a quiet room on our own. I think having a public or a museum side to us keeps us honest as well, keeps us celebrating this fabulous place. Because remember, it was almost like a time capsule. It was almost like one day in the year 1983, everyone at the distillery was told to down tools, close the door, and walk out. That's kind of what the feeling that you get when you're there, that this was literally a working place, and people down their tools and walked out, closed the door. And to that extent, they left behind this time capsule. So you can go in the old office, and the old office, with colours from the 70s and stuff, and you can see these, there's an old cigarette packet, for goodness sake, and there's, half finished, I think they're just things, but, like an old cup, you can still see the stains of tea in it. It's never been cleaned up. It's literally like a time capsule. And we want to celebrate this old place, but also bring it into, give it a modern relevance. The spirit will do that for us, but I think it would be a great shame not to continue celebrating the category, namely the category of Speyside single malt whiskey. So we can say to people, come to our Dallas Dhu distillery site. It will be unlike a lot of the places you go to. If you go to many of the other distilleries, they'll talk about their distillery. It's all about that place. They'll talk about their distillery cat, and it will be a very centric kind of story of just about the distillery. What I would love to do is to celebrate the wider category and say to people, come to Dallas Dhu Distillery, enjoy close-up views of how whiskey is made. That's given. That's not unique to us. That's shared by lots of distilleries. But you can also have an additional layer, because we're going to have hubs. We're going to have the thing called a history hub, where people can talk about the historic aspects of what it was like to grow up and work in the whiskey industry. There are some practices which won't ever get a mention at your standard leading bigger distilleries. There was a practice some of your your listeners may want to hear about, which is called dramming, which was basically used giving working men and women, to the extent that there were a few women in the industry, they were given alcohol from the morning and at various times during the day in order to help the day go by. And they were rewarded with drink and alcohol. And it wasn't the fine whiskey that we all enjoy today, single malts. It was cleric. It was the most strong, basic, hardcore alcohol. This was not a good practice, and it won't surprise you to know that this is no longer acceptable. But it's a story that I'd love to see as part of our understanding of the industry. It wasn't always wonderful. It wasn't always a good thing. It's been very much a boom and bust industry. It creates a lot of the employment, but there's been long periods when Dallas Dhu was closed. This was a down period. So people were out of work. So it had a real economic and social history. What was it? And let's be honest, levels of alcoholism in the industry, in the world of Speyside would probably be higher. What was it like being a teacher, teaching the children of men and women who worked in Speyside's many distilleries? So I do think there's a sort of social history that we can explore. It's not for everybody, but those who want to go that little bit deeper, I'm hoping that they can do that at Dallas Dhu Distillery. They can take that more, is it a more cerebral journey or maybe a more intellectual journey of really trying to understand what it was like there. I should also mention, Mark, because I think you'll be fascinated, but you'll have heard of a gentleman called Charles Doig.
Of course.
Charles Doig, as we know, invented the famous pagoda, which has come to represent, a distillery. Charles Doig worked as a young man in the offices at Dallas Dhu Distillery. We have found in the archives handwritten letters of Charles sending them to the local timber merchant to order the wooden rails on which casks are going to be stored. Absolutely amazing. This architect went on to produce a lot of the buildings in the area, and obviously his name is attached to many of our leading distilleries. We would like to open a section of Dallas Dhu dedicated to the works of and the history of Charles Doig. There is sitting in a museum, sitting in the town hall, not very far away in Elgin, which is the capital of Murray. There is underneath, never seen by anybody, hordes of papers and plans and maps and drawings, all by the famous Charles Doig. They don't get they don't see the light of day because there's nowhere in the county where they're displayed. We would like to bring those to Dallas Dhu and make that a part of the experience. So you can come see the whiskey being made. You can come seeing how we store the whiskey and how whiskey is matured. But you can also, because hopefully you'll spend a long time at the site, and you will also be able to dig that little bit deeper and see something, you know, extra for your money. Because there's a lot of distilleries now in Scotland, and it's quite a common thing for distilleries to open their doors to the public. But I think that we would like, given this opportunity, we would like to do what everyone else is doing, but go that extra mile. Give the person an extra reason for coming to us.
Give me a sense of the timeline involved in getting the distillery back up and running.
Good question, Mark. We are very optimistic. I hope my enthusiasm in this call doesn't place me in this sort of overly optimistic camp. But we have a game plan, which is first we've got 6 months to get a full understanding of how we bring back distillation. That's going to take water extraction licenses from the relevant authorities. We've got a beautiful document, beautiful, that's not quite the word, a very large, substantial document which was put together by one of the big still producers in the area, a very famous one. I think it would be no secret to say Forsyths is one of the leading makers of stills in the world. Well, some years ago, 6 years ago or more, they put together a feasibility study, and they went into every detail and they identified all the equipment and said, well, that still works, that's got 10 years extra, more life in it. And this is like a roadmap which we will be adhering to very closely. Obviously, since they did the document some years ago, and it's obviously gone out of date and so on. But we do have that document and other expert input, so we have a roadmap to follow. So we're talking about getting out, understanding what are we up against in that first 6 months or sooner, and then hopefully we'll be. I've already ordered we want to bring the malting back, so we've got barley growing in the fields adjacent to the distillery. That's being sowed this year for harvesting next year, so we can be using locally grown barley. So that would be the idea, is to get distilling next year. So we'd like to think that we'd have our first spirit coming out of the spirit safe next year, and as early as possible into next year. And then, of course, that frustrating thing that we all have to do, we then obviously have to wait our 3 years for our whiskey to become, our spirit to become formally Scotch whiskey. But who wants a 3-year-old dram? It's not going to be ready to be drunk, although I'm sure we'll be tasting it often enough. But as a product, we can't see it going into bottles. I would have thought a limited number, maybe at 5 years old, a limited number at 8 and 10, and the traditional whiskey ages. But of course, what we're really hoping for is a whiskey which will be selling at its peak in that kind of 12, 15, 18 years. So it is a long game. But then the distillery's been around well over 100 years. So it's not going anywhere. And I should say, one of the things all of us in whiskey have to understand is time. Time, the one thing you can't cheat, and whiskey is an extraordinary product from that point of view. You cannot cheat it. You cannot produce it until it's ready to go. And, you know, as try as we may, you know, 3-year-old whiskies are very nice. I've got some very good 3-year-old whiskies, 5-year-old, even better often. But really, you have to be patient to get a good quality single malt. And that's a lesson that just is just a fact of life about this wonderful, unique industry that we happen to be lucky enough to work in.
Will this become a brand home for Murray McDavid?
Yes, that's irresistible. Murray McDavid has now got its own shop in just down the road, actually, in the same town. Dallas Dhu Distillery is just on the outskirts of a town in Moray called Forres. The old bank in Forres closed down. It's a beautiful Italian Renaissance Palazzo building that was built in 1852, and it was the big bank. Was the big bank in the centre of town. But as it may happen, it may be the same in America. I'm not sure, but a lot of our lovely Victorian towns have had their hearts ripped out of them because the big institutions like banks are closing them. You know, they close. You don't have to go into a bank now. It's all done online. So this beautiful building became empty and available. So we snapped it up, we bought it, and that's going to be the place where you can see Murray McDavid on sale and in its own dedicated shop. Obviously, Murray McDavid sells around the world, but also sells throughout specialist drink shops throughout the UK. But it would be nice to have a Murray McDavid shop. But of course, the Murray McDavid casks, which are artfully matured for the different releases we do, they will certainly, some of those will be sitting at Dallas Dhu in the warehouses there. But in principle, will it become the home? We currently call Colburn Distillery the home, but Colburn obviously is a small place in comparison. I think my colleagues would, I think they would lynch me if they didn't think, if I didn't allow Murray McDavid to become Dallas Dhu to become the home of Murray McDavid. But good question. Thank you for that one.
I think that about does it. Anything else you can add I didn't ask about?
No, I think that's kind of, hopefully that gives you what you want. What I think the Murray McDavid connection is huge. I don't want to say they're the same. Dallas Dhu will be Dallas Dhu Distillery, but it's the Murray McDavid team and Dallas Dhu Distillery. I think that you've got two big you've got two names there. One name, Murray McDavid, famed for its artfully matured products, which we've been selling for many years now. But it's all that know-how, that whiskey know-how, meeting this great opportunity to actually have our own whiskey, our own brand. Just as a little aside, I travel occasionally for the work, for the job, less so now, but back in the day, and I could be anywhere around the world. It happened in America. And there I was, giving a tasting and talking about whiskey and celebrating whiskey and wanting everyone to enjoy this fabulous drink. And you're talking away of whiskey, talking about the different whiskies that we have. And eventually people say, so tell me, whereabouts do you produce your whiskey? Where's your distillery? And as much as I'd like to keep a positive answer or stay upbeat, I'd always feel a little sheepish and go, well, I'll squirm a bit and say, well, we don't really actually have an actual distillery. We kind of use other people's whiskey, which is distilled in other, but I'm on the back foot. I'm immediately on the back foot. There is something about having and owning and running your own distillery, the Scotch Whisky Distillery, which is like, you've arrived. It's what we all hanker for. And there are other companies. If you look at the history of some of the other independent whiskey companies, they've always wanted this great opportunity to end up actually making whiskey themselves. And that's happened to the Langs have done it. They've all, lots of us who have been in the industry for a long time, celebrating, promoting, doing our whiskey, also all quietly think, wouldn't it be nice one day to have our own distillery? And that's kind of where that's where the journey has led us to. And I had a very funny conversation when the news went out. It's like joining a kind of an exclusive club, because I think there's 130 distilleries in the whole of Scotland. But I got a very dear friend of mine, a guy called Jack Teeling, who owns and runs the Teeling Distillery in Dublin, where I saw him last. He rang me up and he said, "Edward, welcome to the club." And I thought that summed it up. It was quite a nice thing for him to say. And there is that sense of club and of responsibility. I think there's a tremendous sense of responsibility that comes with this. And we're just very lucky that we've been given the opportunity to see what we can make. And hopefully single malt lovers, whiskey lovers from around the world will, in time, come to enjoy this long lost but fabulous single malt.
Thanks to Edward Odim for joining us on this week's WhiskyCast In Depth. It's brought to you by Lagavulin, an award-winning single malt scotch from Islay, world-renowned for its balanced, smoky, peaty taste. Discover Lagavulin's full lineup at malts.com. Got the chance to taste through the Tam Dhu range of Speyside single malts this week. Let's start off the What I'm Tasting This Week department with the flagship 12-year-old. It's bottled at 43% ABV, and the nose has touches of figs and dates, fresh berries, tree fruits, vanilla, and hints of hazelnut and smoke. The taste is fruity and tart with tree fruits, fresh berries, a hint of cinnamon, and just a kiss of smoke. The finish is long and fruity, and I'm scoring the Tam Dhu 12-year-old a 93. Now, the 15-year-old uses a higher percentage of European oak Oloroso sherry-seasoned casks than the 12-year-old, and it's bottled at 46% ABV. The nose is nutty and warm with dried fruits, vanilla, a hint of hazelnut, orange peel, pineapple, and subtle spices. The taste is full-bodied and rich with orange peel, cinnamon, vanilla, figs, and pineapple notes, and the finish is long with dried fruits and a lingering spiciness. I'm scoring the Tam Dhu 15-year-old a 94. And finally, the 18-year-old uses a high percentage of European oak and refill Oloroso sherry casks in its blend, and it's bottled at 46.8% ABV. The European oak influence shines through on the nose, which is nutty with touches of figs, dates, chocolate-covered orange slices, honey, and vanilla. The taste starts off with a bite of chocolate and roasted nuts, then a burst of spice comes alive slowly, along with touches of orange peel, figs, and dates leading into a long, complex finish. I'm scoring the Tam Dhu 18-year-old a 94. I've added these tasting notes to our searchable list of more than 3,700 different whiskeys from all over the world. Check it out this week at WhiskyCast.com.
And now, a message from Robin Redbreast.
Kentucky and Ireland have plenty in common. Two homes of horse racing. Bluegrass music is said to have Irish roots. Okay, it's not the longest list, but the Redbreast Kentucky Oak Edition only strengthens the bond. Finished in sustainably sourced Kentucky oak for a captivating nose and round taste. I see a triple crown in this thoroughbred's future.
Proud sponsor of WhiskyCast. Redbreast. Pass it on.
Let's open up the inbox and see what people are talking about this week. Our community segment is presented by Waterford Whiskey. We had a lot of comments on last week's interview with Uncle Nearest founder Fawn Weaver on her new book, Love and Whiskey. Scott Rogers posted this in the WhiskyCast community app. I always enjoy your interviews with Fawn Weaver, and this was no exception. A real highlight of the WhiskyCast year for me. Thanks. And Noel Harity added this. Just listening to this show now after a vacation. Interesting interview, but I absolutely love Fawn's laugh. Every time she laughs, I laugh. Thanks for that. I'll have to get the book. Now, Sherry Moore figures into the Uncle Nearest story Fawn tells in the book as the company's director of whiskey production, and she was one of the women Fawn referred to as having problems getting her calls returned back in the early days of Uncle Nearest. Sherry pushed back on that in a LinkedIn post. Here's what she had to say. Since 1975, when I began my journey at Jack Daniel Distillery and steadily progressed to become the director of whiskey production, overseeing distillery operations, byproducts, barrel washing, quality control, processing, and environmental concerns. Throughout the 1970s, 80s, 90s, and beyond into the 2000s, I encountered no challenges due to my gender. If you work hard, contribute, and know your shit, nobody cares your age or gender. Thank you for that, Sherry. If you have something you'd like to share with whiskey lovers around the world, download the free WhiskyCast community app and join the conversation. You'll find it in your app store. You can also find us on X, Instagram, and Facebook at WhiskyCast. The email address is comments@whiskycast.com. Our community segment is presented by Waterford Whiskey on the web at waterfordwhiskey.com.
Every Irish single-farm origin gives completely different flavours when it's malted, fermented, distilled and matured. That's why we're exploring Irish terroir. Imagine how many flavours we find working with over 100 of them. Waterford Whiskey, the most naturally flavoursome single malt.
Let's close out the show now with Behind the Label, our look at the history, science, and people who make whiskey unique. It's brought to you by Balcones Distilling. Let's talk about casks for a minute. What's the difference between virgin oak, first fill casks, and refill casks? Well, virgin oak is exactly what it implies, new oak that has never been used to mature whiskey before. First fill is a term primarily used by those distillers in Scotland and elsewhere who rely on bourbon barrels to mature their whiskey. Since a bourbon barrel can only be used once, it can't be called virgin oak or new oak, but if it's the first time that barrel is being filled with a distiller's spirit, they usually refer to it as a first fill barrel. And refill is just what it implies, a barrel that's been used to mature whiskey more than once. Now then, what's the difference between a sherry cask and a sherry-seasoned cask? Here there's a finer line to be drawn. Most of the sherry casks being used to mature whiskey today should rightfully be referred to as sherry-seasoned casks. That's because they were built specifically for a distiller and then filled with sherry for 2 years or so, long enough for the sherry to get into the wood, but not so long that the sherry actually matures. A proper sherry cask is rare. It would be one that's been used in a bodega to actually mature fine sherry. Bodega owners tend to hold on to those casks for a long time, and they rarely ever hit the barrel market. In the past, distillers got their sherry casks from the shipments of sherry in barrels from Spain to England, but the Spanish government ended that practice many years ago when it started requiring under law that sherry be bottled in Spain. If there's something you'd like us to look at on an upcoming episode, just get in touch with us. Behind the Label is brought to you by Balcones Distilling, the original Texas whiskey at the forefront of the American single malt movement. Exploring place and provenance with unique style whiskeys ranging from the award-winning Texas One and Lineage American single malts to their Baby Blue, Straight Corn whiskey, and Texas Rye bottled in bond. Discover whiskey from a new perspective at balconesdistilling.com. That's all for this episode of WhiskyCast. You'll find links for the stories in this episode in our show notes at whiskycast.com. That's also where you'll find the latest whiskey news, my tasting notes, the calendar of events, the whiskey photo of the week, and, of course, a complete archive of past episodes going all the way back to 2005. Get in touch with us on X, Threads, Instagram, and Facebook at WhiskyCast, or you can use the WhiskyCast community app. Download it today from the iOS or Google Play stores. Our email address is comments@whiskycast.com.
The 2024 release of Dewar's 19-Year-Old Champions Edition is out now, available at Dewars.com. Get it while you can and appreciate every double-aged rye cask finished dram. Please drink responsibly.
And now, a message from Robin Redbreast.
A thoughtful gift is hard work. What you need is a go-to multi-purpose gift for all occasions. A bottle of Redbreast can say, enjoy every minute, they grow up so fast. Oh. And equally, Nails, apologies for the back pain, I should have just hired a moving company.
Proud sponsor of WhiskyCast. Redbreast. Pass it on.
WhiskyCast is a production of Cask Strength Media, copyright 2024, and comes to you from the charming, yet regrettably dry town of Haddonfield, New Jersey. I'm Mark Gillespie, reminding you that when you drink, please drink responsibly. Thanks for listening.